I'm not. I'm not by the way,
I've done New York a few times.
oh, wow.
I love it.
You know Michael Mark Snabby, one of the board members, one of the board members from the Bronx chick. To develop a market that.
Like good brothers and sisters, we are very close.
We're up.
Okay. joined by our two sponsoring Assemblywomen, Ms. Tapia and our Assemblywoman Cruz. So thank you to both of you for sponsoring this very important panel and discussion. The panel is Multidisciplinary Approach to Strengthening Food Access in Puerto Rico. And I will begin by turning it over to our Assemblywomen to introduce themselves and say a few words about their respective districts. And then we'll go into introductions and then begin with the panel questions.
Go ahead.
Buenos días. First of all, my apologies for running like a few minutes late, but we get asked to do many of these events. I was like running on stage, running off stage, running up here. I get the privilege of representing a community that unfortunately has dealt with food insecurity prior to the pandemic. During the pandemic now is that we're actually seeing it almost in our face. And even now, post-pandemic, I have the highest number of undocumented New Yorkers. It's Jackson Heights, Corona, Elmhurst in the vicinity, which means that my folks can't vote and don't qualify for any social safety net programs, which makes it that much more difficult to serve them. I understand their lived experience very well. I grew up just like them, undocumented, and now I get to fight for their rights. I was the lead sponsor of the Nourish New York bill, which was a unique partnership to provide money so that organizations like some of the ones that we're going to hear from today can take that money, buy food from New York farmers. And it was in the middle of the pandemic that we started that project so that you can keep farmers in upstate New York functioning and alive, and you can help people who are hungry throughout the state and keep them functioning and alive. And so that's a little bit about my work in my district, and I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for the folks who helped put it together.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Cruz. And Assemblywoman Tapia?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Yes, I walk my 10,000 steps looking for this room, guys. So I don't have to do more steps today because my goal is 10,000. So I already did because nobody knew where the room was. But I'm sorry for the inconvenience that brought. But yes, I am Joswiak Tapia, an assembly member in the 86th Assembly District in the Bronx, northwest part of the Bronx. I represent, my district is one of the poorest districts that we have. And I hate to say that every time that I have to put in perspective what is actually happening in our neighborhoods. But my district is one of the poorest districts that there is in the Bronx, not only in the Bronx, but maybe in the state of New York. And because of that, food insecurity is one of the things that actually we're suffering the most. And it's sad because our families and our children that we send into school, if they don't have a good breakfast, if they don't have a good dinner, how their intellect is gonna move. So it is just, my part is, I have Foreign Heights, University Heights, Mount Hope, Morris Heights. I have somebody from Morris Heights here. Morris Heights and Tremont. And my population is majority, 72% of my population is Latino. And I have 18% of African American in my district. And I have 5% that are just a mix of other ones. But I mean, food insecurity is one of the real crises that we are suffering. Not now after the pandemic or during the pandemic. What the pandemic did was that it actually put it right there for people to see it, and having the opportunity to see and to fight for that and getting the resources for it. It was that maybe said, oh, that's happening because of the pandemic. No. Food insecurity has always been there. The pandemic just started to exacerbate exactly what was going on in our communities. But I mean, we are fighting now because I mean, the resources that were given to us during the pandemic, the federal government, they're drying out. We are not going to have, but I mean, those services and those programs that were created because of that, now we are not going to have the funds for it. So we are fighting to make sure that we get these funds where they should be, because I mean, those programs should have been going on even before the pandemic. We just never did it. So I think, I mean, yes, we have a real challenge now, especially in our neighborhoods and the black and brown communities that are the ones that actually are suffering. But we are, we're a duo, two fighters. Two fighters that are gonna continue fighting. I'm glad to be side by side with my colleague, Catalina Cruz, who I look up to. And all over it. Yes, she's the one that I look up to. I mean, but thank you to all of you for coming here and for all these panelists that, my God, if somebody knows what we're talking about, are dead. We put $200 million for Hunts Point this year. And this is an we put $200 million and we're putting more money this year, so we are able to, we have the food distribution that is needed and in the place that it's supposed to be. So.
Well, thank you again to both of our Assemblywomen for championing for your respective districts. I know Assemblywoman Cruz, you spoke about the Nourish New York program and making sure that that became a permanent program, so thank you for that. And of course, your dedication to Hunts Point Market, which we'll hear more about in the panel. For those of you that don't know me, I am your moderator for the day. My name is Shana McCormik, and I am from RAP for Bronx, which is the Relief Access Program for the Bronx. Yes, Bronx is in the house heavy today. Yeah. And I have the privilege of working with many of the folks that you will hear from today. RAP for Bronx does a myriad of distributions and, multidisciplinary approach to strengthening food access in New York City is kind of how we all work together. We work with Food Bank, of course. We work with Rethink Food and Hunts Point Market. And some of the things that you'll hear about today are food systems infrastructure, what that means, the importance of SNAP benefits, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and how here in Puerto Rico, they do not get to, they're not involved in those benefits. They don't receive those benefits here, and you'll hear more about that. Direct to client approach and the community-led approach and the importance of that. Listening and letting the community guide you on the needs. And then micro grants and exploring what that could potentially do and how that could help our communities that are dealing with lack of food access, lack to nutrient-dense goods, et cetera. Each organization has a different approach to food access, which you'll hear about. And I'll jump right into the introductions for our panelists. I'll start here with Nick Buse from Food Bank. And then we'll pass it around and let everyone say a few words about themselves and the organization.
Great, I'm just happened to be next to the moderator. So Nick Buse, I'm the Director of Government Relations at the Food Bank for New York City, where we work with 1,000 community-based organizations to provide food assistance across the 5 boroughs. We do a lot of other stuff, but the bulk of our work operates out of the Hunts Point Produce Market, where we have our trucks that go out and go to soup kitchens and food pantries, faith-based organizations, community-based organizations every day. But the people that we serve are impacted acutely by city, state, and federal policy. And not only is each of our organizations, of course, impacted by that, but the New Yorkers that rely on us, and frankly, across the nation, our federal response to hunger is a critical way for families to keep food on the table. So we'll talk a little bit about that.
Hi, my name is Mary Jo Laborde, and I'm the counterpart. I'm the president and CEO of the Food Bank in Puerto Rico. Bienvenidos todos a su casa. And as we'll be talking a lot about the multidisciplinary approaches to food insecurity in Puerto Rico, it's a subject we could be talking about for a couple of days. But we have an hour, and I'm hoping we can get some ideas and bring some suggestions to the table.
Well, I have a mic in front of me. Phillip Grant, Chief Executive Officer of the Hunts Point Produce Market. It's so beautiful and so energetic to have our champions, Assemblymember Tapia and Cruz. And as Assemblymember Tapia said, they're fighting really hard for markets like Hunts Point, regional hubs that really drive economic development for places like Puerto Rico. And those are some of the things that we'll get into, investing in infrastructure, not only at the market and the aggregation point, but around it. Will help support economic development, drive jobs for the region, and drive jobs around that area. Yep. That's what we're here for. Yep.
You want to use your mic? Oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm Matt Joswiak. I'm the CEO and founder of Rethink Food. Can you hear me okay? I gotta hold it like this.
Karaoke.
There we go. That's Father Mike, everybody. Thank you so much. And it's really an honor to be on this panel today, and thank you for hosting it and inviting me. I really appreciate it. Rethink has a kind of a unique approach. We really believe in something that I heard twice already, in the community-driven, culturally celebrated meals approach. And so we work with community organizations to help find local small businesses and restaurants in their neighborhood. Rethink provides cash grants to those restaurants in the neighborhood to drive jobs and create culturally celebrated food for communities around all over New York City.
Good morning. I'm Father Mike Lopez. I am a priest in Ridgewood, Queens. According to my sign, it just says Ridgewood, so I don't know. I must be all of Ridgewood. So, I am the executive director of Monk Works Social Services and the Hungry Monk Rescue Truck. We do food and security work, and we do. I am the Hungry Monk.
This is the Queens Connect now, the Queens Connect.
She used to kiss me hello, and now she doesn't know. No, I'm just kidding. Pre-pandemic, we started as a homeless food truck, bringing food to homeless street populations in Queens, and then we kind of became a whole other entity. We also do housing and security work, and we run homeless shelters for undocumented men who are vulnerably street homeless in the Assemblywomen's District. Woodside, Elmhurst, Corona, Jackson Heights. And I'm very happy to be here with some of my colleagues. I'm excited. I am from Puerto Rico, so for me to come home, it's a wonderful feeling, and I look forward to this entire experience. Thank you.
Don't let go of the mic yet, because we're actually going to start with you in a few. But so how this will work, we have 4 pointed questions, 4 really important questions, and we kept it at 4 because we really want this to be a discussion and give everyone the opportunity to respond intentionally. And so we will ask. I'll kind of guide who will begin, and then we want everyone to be able to have an opportunity to respond. And we'll keep the responses to give or take 1 to 2 minutes, just so everyone has ample time. So Father Mike, we'll begin with you for our first question, which is, what does food need look like at a community level? How has it changed due to COVID?
Okay, so and I think this is probably true of all of us who are in food insecurity. Pre-pandemic, my organization ran a very small church-based, church grandma food pantry. We had 5 church grandmas who would get some food together, and they would make baggies, and people would come and pick that up. And we would serve about 200 families a week as a small, mostly Trader Joe's rescue and some local supermarkets. And then we had a homeless food truck, which actually went out into the street and took care of those homeless, street homeless populations. One of the things that we noticed right before the pandemic hit was that as we went out and did our field work as a mobile food pantry and as a food truck, was that mothers with children would come up and ask for a bag of groceries or for a hot meal from the truck. Yeah. And we quickly realized that our mission had to be more centered on anybody who came up to us. So we no longer would just focus on street homeless populations. Anyone who came up to the truck, regardless of how you looked, regardless of how you were dressed, regardless of what culture you were, what tradition you were going to get a hot meal. And if we had a food pantry bag, you were going to get one of those as well. We would serve, on average, 200 families a week. And there were days, and I laugh about this all the time, in which it was impossible to get rid of the damn 200 bags. Like, we had to pay people to take the bags. Like, take them, please, take them. And so I had been working with Rethink Food. We kind of came on the scene at the same time. Matt's organization is a few months older than ours. So we grew up together, and we would get food from them, and it was all very just like hyper-local, younger community of volunteers attached to our church grandmas going out in the field and doing this. And then the pandemic hits, and we explode. I have a background in law enforcement and emergency management and logistics, and I knew that this was going to be a big deal. So I went to my council member and I said, listen, dude, we got to ramp this up. This is going to be big, much bigger than we anticipate. And we went quickly from doing 200 families a week to 10,000 families a week in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks. Our organization is a very small, very if you come, it makes no sense what we were able to do in that situation. But I just want to get back to the question. The need, as the assembly member said earlier, was there pre-pandemic? We saw the need really explode during the pandemic. What we saw in our neighborhood in Ridgewood particularly was lower middle class families who typically were not in need of food pantry now becoming food pantry reliant. And as the pandemic has kind of flatlined, we're seeing that, well, two things are happening, particularly in our area. Are the migrant population who is now coming into the community are now recipients. So whereas those families who were lower middle class who went back to work and now are food stable, we have to pivot now to the migrant population. So one of the things that's happening, obviously in New York, it's a citywide problem. The food need has always been there. We have to be liars or blind to say that it wasn't. But it has multiplied by the thousands, since March of 2020. And I think it's going to continue. Another interesting thing that I think is that there are many people who have become so reliant on our pantry work. I'm very direct to client, so I'm not a hub, I'm not a warehouse, I'm not a distributor. We're primo direct to client, hand to hand kind of situation. And so I've seen now that there become an interesting dependence, super or hyper dependence on pantry work, particularly in neighborhoods that maybe historically weren't so dependent. So yeah.
Thank you. We'll go down the line. Yeah, so Matt, would you like to answer that? I'll repeat the question. What does food need look like at a community level? How has it changed due to COVID?
I think the involvement of the broader, Rethink works with a lot of different neighborhoods in New York City, and it's evolved a little bit that everybody seems to be participating a little more collaboratively. And I think that from the distribution production level, it's just become an understanding that unfortunately in New York, wealth inequality has gotten to such an insane point, which is really the core of this problem, that it is kind of all hands on deck. And so I've seen really inspiring, restaurants and small businesses and grocery stores actually now really realizing this and being a part of this discussion, which has been, I'm a very optimistic person, so I think I'm very, actually quite inspiring. And I think that if we can really leverage this momentum kind of post-pandemic and work together, we could actually, really create community and bring people together and bring the nonprofit sector and the for-profit sector to work together to help fight wealth inequality.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, especially with COVID, we all had no choice but to work together and pool resources. So hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about pooling resources and working together. The Assemblywomen, if you would like to chime in at any point, please do feel free, or we can pass it to Phillip to continue with the panelists.
I think the only thing I would add about what we're seeing in the community is, I'm going to talk about two communities. One is the provider community, and one is the recipient community. In the provider community, we are seeing some confusion and frustration with government. When a lot of these projects began to be funded during the pandemic, they were initially meant to be emergency programs, then they became permanent. And as it often happens, I have no other word to describe this, but government fucked up the implementation. There's literally no other way to describe. Robin and I have spent about 6 months trying to, this is my chief of staff, trying to fix the implementation of Nourish New York. And what has happened with some of the other supplemental programs has been pretty, how do I say this nicely? It has been pretty frustrating for many of the folks here who were used to receiving a lot of that money in order to do the work that they do, because for them, they are just shifting crises. It went from the pandemic crises to the migrant crises to whatever's going to happen next, and they rely on those funds to be able to go from 200 to 10,000. And I know, and I heard people gasp, but that was the reality. There was no question, no moment to think often. You just figure out how to get the money and you shift it. And the reason you heard me go, Hungry Monk, when I said that was because I've admired the way that they set up the work that you guys do. It's a fantastic way to bring the food to the community and to provide that service with dignity. And so what food need looks like for the community now is how do we go from simply providing that emergency assistance to creating something more permanent? Because what we are seeing, and I think Father Mike is completely on it with this, is many folks have become completely reliant on it for a number of reasons. They can't find work. They can find work, but it's not sufficient work. And so we are in a different, we're seeing a different face of the same crises now, and what we're hoping to do is ensure that next year there's more money. But money, as we saw with the implementation of Nourish, isn't everything. We put double the money this year, and somehow there's still problems with it. So now we have to hold the agencies to task to make sure that that you guys can do your job.
Thank you, Assemblywoman.
Yeah, I think, like I said at the beginning, yes, this is not because of the pandemic, but the majority of the funds that we got for the pandemic to deal with that crisis, many of that money came from the federal government. And that money is drying out, like I said. And this is now the fight that we have, and this is the big challenge that we have, because those services should have been there way before. Because, I mean, this crisis was not just created by the pandemic, it was exacerbated by the pandemic. So I think, I mean, that, yes, we are just saying the same thing because, I mean, for example, we are a little bit worried because, I mean, we know that many families are gonna be actually suffering in the meantime that we continue fighting to make sure that we put all the money that is needed for that. But I mean, yeah, we need good jobs, guys, so that our families be able to actually be able to raise their children and the family with dignity. If we don't have good jobs, and if we're taking the money away from the schools that we already put in there because of the crisis that we have, then, I mean, we're working backwards. And I think, I mean, this is the real challenge that we are confronting now. And I think, I mean, we're ready to continue, I mean, in there, I mean, making sure that those things don't happen. And but I mean, at the same time, we need everybody to know what is actually going on. So you could be out there with us fighting this fight, because I mean, it's going to be a big thing, because we're talking about billions of dollars, guys, that our communities deserve. Absolutely. And that we have to fight for it.
Yeah. Thank you, Assemblywoman. And something that you both had mentioned in one way or another is working, jobs. And we have working folks on these lines at this point, so there definitely has been a shift since the pandemic, and I just wanted to highlight that. There are working folks on these lines. Phillip, we'll go over to you. What does the need look like at a community level, and how has it changed since COVID, or due to COVID?
Thank you, by the way, Shana. Just wanted to take a quick moment just to acknowledge our partners in the room, Lisa and team, Bronx Chamber. We see Morris Height Health Center, thank you. And Kimberly, we met you on the airplane. Thank you for supporting Medgar Evers in the room. Thank you. But I'll be really straight to it. What we've learned through COVID is how much data matters, and data is going to help us in the future. Now, right in the start of COVID, we started reporting to our governmental agencies every single day. What's coming in at the gate? We saw some extreme drops. We saw some extreme peaks. We also, working with our partners within the community, we found out where the need needs to go in terms of data. So what we're working to do is use that data to drive economic development or drive the resources to where it is. Now, thank you, Assemblymember Tapia, you echoed it. Jobs are a straight line to tackling food insecurity. And Assemblymember came up in December and she said, we're going to fight for you. And that's what she's been doing ever since. And that's why we're so big on Food hubs, as an aggregator, so big on partnership. If we drive funding and economic development or resources to markets, it will drive economic development around that and create jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Phillip. And Mary Jo, you have a very unique point of view, being our representative from Puerto Rico. So what does food need look like at a community level, and how has it changed due to COVID here in Puerto Rico?
Well, since the title is Multidisciplinary Approaches to Strengthening Food Security in Puerto Rico, I'll talk about that a little bit. The truth is that you're 100% right. Data rules. And one of the things that we found out in COVID is that data is right. And if you ask me what changed at the community level, the answer is really nothing. Nothing really changed. Because the communities continue to have the same problems they had before. Just many more people had it, and we saw it at the aggregate level. But what COVID and, frankly, Maria did is kind of take the cover off of the reality that the numbers and the statistics give us. 45% of Puerto Ricans are under the poverty level. Unfortunately, Puerto Rico does not get read by the USDA food insecurity measure, which we're fighting to change. And so our food insecurity measure is kind of an estimate based on the poverty levels, and it's about 36%. So those numbers, when you talk to the average community person that's not suffering from food insecurity, does not believe it. And what this crisis and Maria did is confirm the statistics, uncover the fact that this is happening at our community level. And that really is what changed with the pandemic and COVID. But at the core of the community level, at the core of the household level, nothing really has changed. We're still going through like you were saying, it exacerbated, or in our case, it took the tap off a problem that already exists. And for us at the food bank, and I know we'll talk about SNAP in another question. Yes. I won't tackle it now.
Oh, yes, we will.
At the food bank, what we do every day just grew, but it did not change, unfortunately. And as we move away from COVID, that's when we're starting to see the issue. When the funds are no longer there, where the increased SNAP benefits are no longer there, where the individual supports from the federal government are no longer there, and we're going back to the pre-COVID reality with inflation and all the other things on top of it. Now is where we're seeing the issue.
Thank you, Mary Jo. And Nick?
Sure, I'll just say very quickly, talking about data, in New York City, we witnessed 80% more visits to food pantries and soup kitchens during the pandemic, and continue to be than before the pandemic, 80% more visits. So in the first 6 to 12 months of the pandemic, over 35% of the network that we have in New York City of emergency food providers, food pantries and soup kitchens, suspended service. So that meant 70%, 65% of the network was serving 80% more people, more meals. So the throughput that Father Mike was talking about, going from 200 to 10,000, sounds unbelievable, but that's the reality. And the point that I want to make about community need was something Assemblymember Cruz spoke a little bit about, which is that it's not surprising that over a third of emergency food providers suspended service during the pandemic, because they're run by seniors who are volunteers. We do the work of community food assistance on the backs of volunteers, on the backs of our senior citizens. And that is one of the strengths of the network, but it's by the grace of individuals and people with the support of public policy and funding, but it's a concerning point. Now, I think in New York, we're back up to where we were before, but the food demand continues to be as high as it was during the heat of the pandemic as well. So we can talk a little bit more about that, but I just wanted to point out that from the community need, it's community members and the organizations that are serving communities that are so essential.
Thank you, Nick. So we spoke a little bit about community need in the first question, and the second question is about the community response. So what does the community response to food insecurity look like today? That's the question. I think I'd like to start with Matt to kind of discuss how the community response and how you've rallied the community together under Rethink.
Yeah, thank you, Shana. And I've said it a couple times, but really focusing on the small business community. Phillip, I didn't realize we were so incredibly aligned, but it truly is about jobs and good jobs, and like trying to get as many people involved in this. Rethink and everybody, the idea of giving cash to a restaurant as a nonprofit was a very ridiculous idea pre-COVID, and then everybody really started getting behind it. It is a way, and we do really believe in data, and we can back it up. But we had a restaurant owner who grew up in the South Bronx who paid off his mom's mortgage because he'd been a part of this project for so long, and like that's the actual change, like ownership. And we partnered with the Aspen Institute, McKinsey, and the Office of Food Policy, and the Mayor's Office of Food Policy to start to measure this. And when we give money to a restaurant, Rethink's given over $40 million to over 100 small businesses in New York City in the neighborhoods that we serve. We found out that it doubles the amount of jobs, and it creates 33% more localized spending, and it creates 25% more tax revenue. We have to just trust the community, and we have to just trust them by giving them resources. And that's we have to bolster our community.
Mike, since you're one of the community partners with Rethink, maybe you want to give a response. What does the community response look like?
I want to touch a little bit on how my direct community was impacted during the pandemic, because like Nick said, my 5 church grandmas were like, I'm not coming in. We were put in a unique position. We operate a homeless shelter in our church basement. And my program is an overnight program, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. At 7 a.m., my homeless men need to leave. And I said to them, you suckers are all going to get COVID. You're going to be in the street. You're going to be wilding out. Guess what? Now you're all volunteers. And I made those 15 men volunteers of our local food pantry. And so in a community where the idea that we were going to open a shelter was really not desired, now these 15 men became the supporters of that community who was fighting against them. My aha moment personally was when one of my homeless men who lived in the shelter program was able to hand a bag of groceries to the guy who was leading the fight against homeless sheltering in our church. And I said, I was standing at that line, and I said, Lord, if you take me today, I seen the glory of God, right? And that sucker couldn't even look at me in the eyes because he was on the line. He was like this. And when that homeless guy, his name is Gilly, he's famous in our program, he gave that man a bag. I said, this is it. And so for us, our community engagement looked more like people who typically wouldn't be involved in that work getting involved. Ridgewood is being hugely gentrified right now. And so when we put a call out, when Slack and all that stuff was like getting really popular, we put a call out for volunteers, and we didn't get church grandmas. We got young hipsters and like funky, strange. I had a bunch of strange people around me. I'm usually the strange priest with the tattoos and stuff, right? But we had some really strange new Ridgewood implants, people coming in from Bushwick, people coming in from Bed-Stuy, who said, listen, we want to do things. We want to deliver groceries on a bike. We want to, we had these cab drivers that showed up from Phoenix, which is a local cab service, that almost, they lost like 40 people who were working there. The guys were showing up in taxis, hazmat suits to the church, and they were doing direct deliveries. I don't know how the hell, and I don't know if you had anything to do with this, Elmhurst Hospital put us on their discharge list. And they said, if you have COVID and you're not dying, go back home and then call Father Mike and he'll send you food. I don't know how that happened. But so we were able to engage a community that typically might have just said, like, we don't want to be involved in first of all, working with a church because we know there's a lot of anti-religious sentiment going around. And so, but then, being a church organization that said, come as you are. We love you. You're trans. You want to help out? Great. You're purple. You want to help out? You're great. Come. Everybody just come. We need everybody. And we were able to, put on over 160 volunteers like this, and we were able to really change the course. We did, out of that little church, 30 million pounds of food out of a tiny church in Ridgewood, Queens, with no money. And that had to do with the idea that people in the community wanted to get involved and really wanted to make a change. And we're working now. We just established here in Ponce, this week, we just established a monastery. Well, we've been establishing it for years. It was just officially opened this week. And we are bringing Hungry Monk to Puerto Rico. We're going to bring the same work idea, engaging. I'm sure Mary Jo is very much aware.
We have to talk.
Yes, you feel free to take me to dinner tonight. We saw, even like during Maria, we supported and we saw the same reality. Local organizations, churches, small NGOs, people without money but with big heart, wanting to do the work. And so we're going to bring that same concept. It works for us in St. Louis. We have Hungry Monk St. Louis. We have Hungry Monk Chicago. It works. And so we want to bring that same engagement here to Puerto Rico.
Thank you, Mike. We have 2 more questions after this. I want to make sure we get through, but I want to be conscious of the time. So we're going to go to Nick and maybe go back that way. So Nick, what does the community response to food insecurity look like today?
Oh gosh, people who are on the ground have such compelling stories, like Father Mike. I think the point that I would make about the community response, in building on the idea that it's often volunteer run, is that it relies on multiple sources. Households rely on, like everybody, right? Multiple sources of income, of resources. So, our collective response needs to keep an eye on what kind of food is available in schools. Our collective response needs to understand what benefits are available or aren't available to people. So I think that our community response is hand in glove with our collective response. So that's the idea I'd like to share.
Mary Jo?
Just really quickly, definitely there was a lot of uprising from the community, but it came from Maria. So Maria taught us to be a lot more self-sufficient, and with COVID, that we've been on a 5-year emergency in Puerto Rico. Maria, COVID, the earthquakes, the hurricane. So we haven't really stopped, and that kind of wave of self-reliance continued through COVID. And we're at the food bank. What we're seeing is a lot of, I call them wild support systems from churches that became officially incorporated because of COVID, but because they wanted to help. So if you see our mix of support agencies, we've been seeing a lot more community and religious organizations working with the food bank instead of like large established pantries.
Thank you. Phillip?
Yep. I'll be just to echo Father Mike, Mary Jo. You've seen a lot more creative partnerships. I'll give you an example. We have Morris Height Health Center in the room. Tamara and Nikki. We've seen them take one partnership and split the partnership in 2 and to serve more needs. We've just recently, Tamara and Nikki did we're going to call it our annual thing now with the Halloween, really starting with the youth, switching away from candy, really pushing, took apples and did, 9 events over, or 9, I don't know the numbers, but they stretch around. So you're seeing more creative partnerships and basically trying to stretch the resources to meet the need.
Partnerships, collaboration, pooling of resources. We're going to keep hearing pooling of resources because it truly is important to do. I'm going to go on to the third question, which is, what are some of the resources, local, state, federal, that communities have access to or don't have access to? And what are the benefits and challenges for each, and what's missing? I'm thinking that I would maybe start with Nick, and I think Food Bank can maybe talk about SNAP, and we'll go that way.
Yeah, so New York City is unusual in that there are local, city, and state supports for food assistance. It's not the case across the nation. Nationally, there's one program for food pantries and soup kitchens. It's called the Emergency Food Assistance Program, TFAP. And the federal government has invested in it, but it has experienced challenges because of the supply chain and because of a myriad other community-based challenges in the face of dramatic growth in need. So we know that when people come to food pantries, it's the sort of the last stop. That's the last best option. The first line of defense against food insecurity are benefits. So that's in in mainland U.S. That's SNAP. That's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So that program is a good example of how policy can be profound and help people. So during the pandemic, there was an emergency allotment. People received more benefits that was clawed back and stripped away from households. So I always remember a woman who was interviewed who said, so she was receiving a SNAP emergency allotment. She said, look at my fingernails. Aren't they beautiful? I've been eating so much more produce since I've been able to buy more food with my SNAP benefits. So it's a profound benefit. And other public policies demonstrate how change making, and I want to call out the child income tax credit, which for the first time in years showed that we could lift families with children out of poverty. At the same time, senior poverty increased. So childhood poverty was decreasing because we gave people more benefits through taxes. Senior poverty increased because we weren't doing the same thing for our seniors. So we need to do a lot of stuff, and New York State has opportunities, the federal government has opportunities, increasing SNAP benefits, increasing the minimum benefits for SNAP, investing in benefits for people who don't currently qualify, people who are formerly incarcerated, people who are undocumented or don't have green cards. So there's lots of opportunities for improving. And I'll stop there because I know Mary Jo is going to talk about how SNAP doesn't impact Puerto Rico in the way it does in New York.
Thank you. Yeah, let me give you a 30-second summary. The way the Puerto Rican program works, SNAP, you just take the S out, but it's not that simple. It's a block grant. It's a fixed amount of money that Puerto Rico gets every year, as opposed to every other state in the nation that gets money according to how many people need it. That's the difference. And because of that, as a result, that changed in 1980 until 1982, 84, if I'm not mistaken. Before that, we used to be in the same program. When that changed, the number of people that were able to participate in this new program went down from 60 to around 40%. And the amount of money that each person can get because of this block grant is about half of what you would get if I get on a plane and I move to New York or Florida or any state in the nation. That's the issue. So when you add on to that the fact that 85%, and we haven't talked about that here yet, but 85% of our food is imported, increases the price. Add on to that inflation after COVID. Add on to that the elimination of the pandemic extra benefits that were clawed back. So we have a population that has less access to food, less income. We just talked about the 43% poverty level. The average income in Puerto Rico is around $20,000. You add on to that you have less support from federal funds and more expensive food. It's a perfect storm for food insecurity. So that's what we're working on right now, and I'll do my plug in here. We are working with the federal government, lobbying to change Puerto Rico from NAP to SNAP.
Very important.
Well, we were in a Congress flying about a month ago, working in September, a month and a half ago, to talk to every single congressperson that we could talk to make sure that at least Puerto Rico gets language into the new farm bill to start the transition. We're not asking to have it transitioned immediately, just having language so we can start that process. That's one thing. And then at the local level, one of the things that I'm seeing from a lot of the states that we work with food banks on is how the state government supports the food bank system and the food insecurity work. And we need to do that here. It's not a law. It's not incorporated into the local budget. And every year we have to fight to get a piece of the congressional supplemental monies that nonprofits get every year. By the way, it should have been approved in June. It's November 9th. Hasn't been approved yet because it's a pot of money, again, that gets distributed to every nonprofit in the island, and they're still trying to decide who's going to get it. And we should not, this issue should not be discretionary. It should be part of our state budget, just like in New York.
Thank you, Mary Jo.
Shana, if I may.
Yes.
First, I want to welcome one of our partners in the legislature, my colleague, Marian Button-Shawn, who has worked, she's back here. She represents upstate New York, where we have a lot of farms. And, you know, when we're thinking through what are some of those resources, I think the biggest piece missing, and I'm going to echo what Phillip had said earlier, is we don't have the data. And so every single time that we're trying to figure out how do we argue for this in favor of farms or for this in favor of our food pantries, because we never paid attention to food insecurity in the way that it's in our face since the pandemic, no one thought of investing or funding the research or answering the questions. It was always left up to you guys to tell us what was needed. And then when it came time, government was like, well, do I trust your numbers? Well, then we got to give you the numbers. So one of the things that we, actually, Marian and I partnered to do this, is to fund programs that work in upstate and downstate to get us that data, to get us that information. And the other piece of it, and this is much more specific, for a lot of these folks who had to go from 200 to 10,000 in a matter of a week, what they can tell you is the biggest roadblock to actually being able to provide a lot of this food is refrigeration. And it's like, how do you go from the abuelitas who were mostly doing the dry food to being able to provide produce, milk, meat, things that spoil safely. And so part of what I'm going to be undertaking next year is getting that data, because as part of Nourish, we demanded that you actually do that study, but then making the argument, now that we have the data, we as a state, this is part of our job. Let's fund, whether it's helping you guys, retrofit or buy new equipment, because you can't continue to function just on the canned food and expect that we're somehow going to help the community get out of this pandemic. Because that's the second pandemic, food insecurity. We haven't gone through that yet.
No, thank you, Assemblywoman Cruz. You hit a very important point, which after Phillip, you answer this question. Our next question is actually about infrastructure. So we'll be bringing that up again, but that was a very valid point. So Phillip, to answer the last question we were talking about on resources, what are some of the resources local, state, and federal communities have access to, benefits, challenges, and what's missing in your opinion?
So much great alignment along the panel here. Great points, Assembly Member Cruz. One of the things that we're looking at right now, and on the New York State side, Commissioner Ball, there's local produce sourcing, food sourcing, that could help here as well, which would lead into the infrastructure piece that we'll talk about. I'll get there. Those are some of the things that we're looking at right now that will help drive down the cost of produce or cost of food just in general, and cold storage is a big thing for us. That's one of the things we're embarking right there in the South Bronx, bringing more cold storage there, because we understand that in order for us to keep up with population growth, keep up with the growth of the city, the region, we have to put investment there. And those are some of the things we'll chat about in the next segment.
Thank you. You can keep the mic.
Keep the mic.
Because we'll open, I think, the next question with you. How does physical infrastructure and readiness impact our work, our collective work?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. And, so Assemblymember Tapia, she said back in December, she said, she came, she recognized it. So why are you asking for so little investment in your infrastructure? Now, there's a multiple things we're doing. She said, I'm going to go up and I'm going to fight for you, right? Now, what we're seeing, not only in New York and in the region, is that our partners in Europe, they're doing the same thing. They're evaluating where to put hubs, markets, aggregation points. aggregation points will help areas like Puerto Rico. If we have an aggregation point, we locate a farmer close to the aggregation point. That reduces the distribution costs. We get to the aggregator. Alex and I, on the airplane, one of our emails on here was a big source of food looking for an aggregation point. Now think about it, flash forward, it's a marathon, not a sprint. If we have those systems in place, then a farmer in Puerto Rico will have a reliable source to send to an aggregation point, cold storage, you name it. That could be an ecosystem. And then from there, you have the network of merchants through relationships figuring out how to get that food out to where the need is, and that's where we're pushing that data. So that's where we're seeing the most need for. It's not just us here in our region down in the South Bronx, but that's something that could help Puerto Rico, and that's something we know that our European partners are doing currently. They're looking to, they have a market in the South, they're looking to put a market in the North, and that's really what that is. But one of the things that I will echo here, Assemblymember Tapia Cruz, they're at the forefront. They're fighting for a sustainable food system, period.
Thank you. Mary Jo, do you want to give us some insight on how physical infrastructure and readiness impacts your work here in Puerto Rico?
Absolutely. And I'm talking about two things. Following up on what you were saying with food infrastructure. Definitely, like I said, 85% of our food is imported. So we, as the food bank, are one of our major drivers and strategic priorities is to work on rebuilding the agricultural infrastructure in Puerto Rico. We used to have that back in the 1950s when we were a huge sugarcane and coffee producer, and we lost that with industrialization. We have something, and working with Feeding America, we're part of a project called the Food Security Equity Impact Fund. And it's exactly that. It's a fund to impact, to have sustainable and really changing sources of funding for projects. And we have two projects that we're working on. The first one that is a seed bank. We found out in Maria that when hurricanes come, farmers want to rebuild their farms right away. The problem is at that point, the whole agricultural infrastructure died and there was no seeds. So they brought seeds from Brazil, Miami, and other places. Those seeds were not locally resistant to the local plagues and all that stuff, and they died. And so we're building a seed banks so that it's all locally grown, locally resistant for seeds of local food that gets grown in Puerto Rico. That's one. And the other one is a farm in the South where we're working with the pharmaceutical industry to bring compost and bring product for composting, and composting becoming the source of the farm, working with the seed bank. So rebuilding the agricultural infrastructure. These are two small projects, but those are specific examples of things that we need to be working on. Infrastructure-wise, the other thing as a food bank, and I'll be quick with this, we were a hub and no-spoke operation. You know, we were the hub in Carolina, about 10 minutes from here. But frankly, it seems like a small island, but asking our agencies to drive 3 hours from Mayagüez on the West Coast to get food at the food bank, sometimes food that would come from a Walmart in Mayagüez, it does not work. And so we're working on a program to establish what are the barriers of food access in the island. And these are the physical infrastructure barriers in Vieques, in Adjuntas, and we're working on things like a mobile pantry business. That's why I was thinking of, Father, we have to talk. Deploying the bank to the communities. That infrastructure is not there, and we need to work on that.
Thank you. I'm going to give the 10-minute mark. So, Nick, did you want to?
Just want to make sure.
Yep. Okay.
You guys know more about the
Infrastructure, yes. So if Assemblywoman Tapia, you want to speak to infrastructure, and then we'll let one of our reps from Rethink group speak to infrastructure on that end as well, and we'll go to our closing question afterwards.
Well, Phillip didn't say, but there is such an horrible amount of food that is just not utilized and that had to be thrown out because the infrastructure that we have, especially in Hunts Point, that is the biggest distribution center that we have in the U.S. And even with that, we don't have all the infrastructure to be able to use all that food that is every single day throw out. Because the infrastructure is not there to distribute fast, to make sure the space is actually utilized intelligently to be able to use all the resources and all the food. I mean, if the infrastructure would be up to what day we live in today, we would have 3 times what we have right now. And I think, that's the reason, we put in the resources because, that should have been done a long time ago. And we should be, talking about that a long time ago. But, like we said, the pandemic exacerbated these issues and put us to look for data and put us to look for where the resources are coming from. And then the pressure that we were able to put because the pandemic was just killing our people. In my neighborhood, I saw, a building that was closed and the windows were closed every single day, 3 times or 4 times, whatever it was, the people that have died in their apartments because of COVID. And that put us in a stage that all of us were actually thinking what life actually meant in our communities. And what we haven't been doing for a long time that needed for us to pay attention. And this is that's going on right now. And I am just, let me tell you guys, this panel was amazing in the sense of all the information that you have brought and the experience that you have, on all that had to do with food insecurity and that had to do with so much with good jobs, guy. We had to fight for that.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Tapia. And we have fierce leaders in front of us, so thank you both. Maybe, Matt, you want to speak to infrastructure, and I know the Assemblywoman just mentioned waste, and I know Rethink does great work with regards to rescue and turning those into meaningful meals as well.
Yeah, I think that we tend to kind of just ignore the communication challenge, which this actually is the root of. People don't, people have great stuff, and then they don't know that the restaurant down the street or the grocery store next to the street is throwing away a case of broccoli. They're not having that discussion. And I think there's a lot of different tech platforms and communication devices that are being used. And if there was digital infrastructure, especially in rural America, to help people communicate better, I think it would have a really, really, really solid impact.
Thank you. That's a good point. I think when we think infrastructure, you're thinking trucking and this and that, but communication is definitely a lifeline that's needed. So we'll go into our closing question, one person from each org.
Can I add something to the infrastructure question that no one really talks about, and it's the manpower in which you pay the manpower and how you support the manpower. For decades, a lot of these pantries have been reliant on volunteers, and I think it's completely unfair to the community-based organizations to expect them to continue to function to that level simply on volunteers. And what the pandemic did to the mental health of a lot of those volunteers, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them are like, screw this, I can't do this again, because it's completely earth-shattering for a lot of people what they had to see every single day in a lot of those pantries. And so when we are thinking of infrastructure, we can't just build the building. We have to actually pay the people who are going to occupy the building.
Thank you for that. Yes.
And support the people who are going to occupy that building so that the building doesn't fall apart. And that's something that when we are thinking through what needs to be funded next year, I know that there's a fiscal crisis at the city, at the state level, and I can't even imagine. I'm sure here there's still a fiscal crisis. You've been on a long, I would argue that you've been on a longer than 5-year crisis. We have to think about that piece, and when we're thinking of where to put the money and what to cut and where to go, we can't forget about something as basic as this.
Thank you for mentioning that. And volunteer fatigue is a real thing. And we, for those of us that were doing on the ground work, and we saw that firsthand. And especially, we know that this work needs to continue. So having funding available for salaries and wages or stipends, especially for our seniors that are on fixed incomes, I mean, that is a great point and can really be beneficial across the board. Phillip, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add one more piece to just the infrastructure piece, and a big piece is technology. And we've heard the common vein, which is data. Some of the unique technologies that we're looking at is in terms of sourcing, Assemblymember Tapia, we have our merchants that would say, listen, if we have 10 items and we know we could only get rid of or sell 5, we're going to donate the other 5. So that's how we're using data. That's actually at the forefront of some of the work that Matt is doing at Rethink. You know, those are where some of those ideas are coming from. Now, on the other side, we've looked at I always say it's the facility we have now and the facility we want to get to in the future. We've looked at pilot. We just started a pilot program within the market, complementing some of the traditional sources that we do with the food bank, but also aggregating internally, making sure that we are reducing our waste stream and actually getting the need out to the folks. So we started that actually in August with Share and Excess.
Thank you. I do want to leave at least 1 or 2 minutes for maybe a couple of questions. So we did have a closing question, although it was touched on. And the closing question was, what are the most pressing opportunities for policy changes, federal, New York State, Puerto Rico, that will improve food security in New York City and Puerto Rico? So 30-second response to that, I'm going to just kind of call on Mary Jo maybe to respond on from Puerto Rico's point of view. And then maybe one of the assemblywomen for New York State. So again, what are the most pressing opportunities for policy changes that will improve food insecurity here in Puerto Rico?
Hi. Definitely NAP to SNAP. That's a basic. We need to change that. And in addition, one of the things that you were talking about with business, it's we need to stop thinking about the charity food system. I'm talking about the non-profit food system. And we need to, that policy of addressing food insecurity as part of our state priority, that needs to change. And instead of thinking about it as a charity, it has to be part of what we are empowered and called on to do to support our neighbors. And that's part of the state policy change that needs to happen right away.
Thank you, Mary Jo. And Assemblywoman Cruz, you had spoke to a couple of programs, in particular Nourish New York. There's also been a couple of conversations around farming, which I'm a huge advocate for, and we need more of that in the Bronx to change our health outcomes there. So in your opinion, what are some of the opportunities for policy changes in New York State to address food insecurity?
I think other than those two, one of the things that I saw work very well, and I think as a state we failed by not continuing to fund it, was the Restaurant Opportunity Act. And I would like to see a different version of that. One of the things that worked really well, we ran a food pantry out of our office, and we did it in partnership with Chefs for America. And what they did and I think a lot of other folks, and I think you guys do the same, was we are going to pay a local restaurant, and they're going to provide you food pantry with the hot meals for the day. And so we had at least 5 to maybe 7 of our local restaurants who were actually doing the food for our pantry as well as other ones, and to have them now say to us, if it wasn't for this money, we wouldn't have survived. And now to turn around and say, well, figure it out on your own.
Right.
And a lot of those places still owe back taxes, still owe back rent, because the money that the federal government and the city and the state gave was simply not sufficient. It's
No,
it
it wasn't a permanent money.
yeah, I don't have another word to describe it than it's sad, because we helped them survive, and now we're just like, you're shit out of
That's
luck.
it.
Figure
Gone.
it out on your own.
It's gone. Yeah.
And so I would like to see it next year come back up. I think it was a 25 million investment, but it needs to be more than what we were giving, because what we were saying to these small businesses was it's $5,000 tops. You tell me what small restaurant can do with $5,000? Not a lot. It's probably less than their monthly rent. It's probably less than their monthly payroll. And so I want to see real investment. We owe it to these small restaurants who helped us stay alive during the pandemic to actually fund programs like that. And the other thing that I would like to see is more money for infrastructure support so that we can create pantries that are more dignified. And when I say dignified is, we come from communities que somos muy orgullosos. And the idea of standing in a pantry when you have a mask made a lot of people feel safer. And people who would never visit a pantry felt comfortable going. But the minute that these masks are coming off, a lot of these folks won't come. And we've seen it in our own community. And I've seen in John Rivera's district, in Assemblyman Rivera's district, there is a food pantry that has a setup that I think is fantastic. You go in, and it's almost like a supermarket.
I just inaugurated one in my district.
It's amazing. You go in, and you pick what you want and what you need. Because what was happening often, too, was people would get more than, and they would throw it out. So I want us to invest in more programs like that, in giving you the infrastructure so that you can create the kind of dignity these folks deserve when they're going to go get food, and ensuring that we're putting enough money to bring back the restaurant opportunity or a version of that.
Yes.
With more money.
Thank you.
Yes, I just inaugurated one of those food pantries, and it's amazing because the dignity is something during the pandemic. And I'm going to say this because this is just, it brought me down at that time during the pandemic, where I was doing food distribution thanks to Holmes Point and to all these food distributors that make sure that in my district and all over the Bronx, we didn't have that issue. And when we did that, more than 100,000 food with distributors and that. But one of those days, there was we have, like 700 people in line waiting for the food. And there was a lady that came was dressed going to work with the suit and all of that. And it was almost finished. And whatever I have left, it was not what all the other people got. It was just the remaining. And I sent my staff and I said, okay, go to the line and say that only the next 5 people are going to be able to have that then. So we have a line like 100 people that were not going to be able to get it. And she came and she said, don't worry, give me whatever is left. And she did it because she felt that she felt that I was doing that with dignity. I was nobody taking any names, nobody was taking any pictures, nobody was doing any of that because I never allow that to happen when I'm doing that type of thing. And that brought me down because she said whatever is left, and it was only carrots left and potatoes. The other stuff was not there. And she said that she wanted that. And she was going to work, guys. And they didn't have the opportunity to buy the food. So that's what these things does. And a couple of, I think it was 6 weeks ago, I inaugurated one of those pantries. And the most important thing of that I love was that it's like a cashier, that you go and you actually think, you believe that you are paying for what you are getting, and you go and you pick whatever it is, and they just provide you with a list of what you got. And I thought when I saw that program that it was amazing. It was a game changer for many families because you cannot feel ashamed for feeding your family.
No,
for feeding your children and making sure that they have a good food to go to school or to go to bed before they go to bed. So for me, that's a game changer that time, and I love it. And I am trying to see how we're gonna invest more in that and the infrastructure. That's something that we said. 200 was not all the money that is needed to change the infrastructure I did. We are fighting for more than, for the other 200 million that
only
we
the
have to put this
beginning.
year. Yes,
Yeah.
of course. I mean, we're gonna have to do that, and, you know, we're partnered on that.
And Shana, I have to apologize because I have to go set up for my next panel. Unlike this one, my next one is actually, I'm the one driving the ship.
Yes.
So I just want to say thank you to
Yes.
everyone for the work that you're doing on this issue. I leave you guys in good hands, and have an amazing time this weekend.
And we're
So.
here to support you,
Thank you.
Assemblywoman, in any way.
In my
that
in
we
my
can.
ask
I have to
for
go.
the folks who are here who do Nourish New York, if you have
Yes.
horror stories,
I
I'm
do.
collecting them.
I do.
So shoot us an email at cruci@nyassembly.gov. We are collecting horror stories from both ends, on the farming end and the community organization end, because we're working to fix what the Department of Health
Thank
has
you.
so royally screwed up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I need to.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. We went a little overtime, but as you see, there's multiple ways to address food access, and please do